Hello, everyone. This is Defense Politics Asia, and this is the super duper uber live panel coming right after the super panel we had with Scott Ritter. And today we have History Legends, New World Econs, THETI mapping, SuriyakMaps. Weeb Union will be late, and I do not know where Militia Summary went to. Maybe he went to sleep. So anyway, hello everyone. Thank you for watching, and I would like to let the individual people to introduce themselves. So let's start off with Alex from History Legends.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex from History Legends. My passion is military history, and I try to look and analyze the Ukraine war from this perspective.
Hello everyone, my name is Ian. I run the New World Econ channel, or formerly it was New World Econ. It's now NWE War Reports. I have a degree in economics, and I've always been fascinated with history and military history as well. And I like to report on the Ukraine war from a geopolitical perspective as best as I can.
Hey, what's up, everyone? My name is THETI Mapping, and I originally started out as just like an animation mapper, but since then I've taken like a more serious perspective on the war, focusing mainly just on the front lines, and I've tried to just locate the general location of units. So that's really what I like focusing on. Thank you for having me on.
Hello, everybody. I'm Suriyak from SuriyakMaps project. Most of you will know us for our work in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen, and now the Ukrainian-Russian war. And it's a pleasure to be here and have this debate with the other people.
I would just want to share with you guys the format of today's panel. We'll first we'll chit chat, discuss among ourselves for maybe around an hour, and then after finish discussing, we will answer the Q&A. So if you have burning questions, like it's burning you and you are feeling a lot of sunburn, you can super chat the question. For the super chat questions, we will definitely answer. Then if not, then if there's no super chat, then we'll go into the comments to answer whatever question that we feel like answering. Like, we just pick the one that we feel very comfortable with. What do you eat for dinner and stuff like this. So let's start. Do you have anything you want to say? If not, I'll just ask some questions. Okay, let's start off with the easiest question. What is the tide of war now in Ukraine? Who is winning? What do you guys think? Because everyone thinks differently, right? This is the same question I asked during the Scott Ritter's panel as well.
Well, just to start off, generally, I'd say that the current moment, you see Russia has regained some of its momentum. What I mean by this is that they're like actively attacking across a broad front. I'm not necessarily saying that they've made any significant breakthroughs, but we are seeing more offensive activity reported by both sides. And like you could see that in Zaporozhye, you could see that around Svatovo Kremina. And then obviously the most significant part is Bakhmut. But we're going to get more into the details, I expect.
SuriyakMaps. SuriyakMaps is very neutral.
Okay, so the war has been in a phase of stalemate and attrition for months, actually. Well, with small Russian advances on the eastern front, but without any significant change in the war plan. So, in the light of the last development, it could be said that Russia has regained the initiative lately. However, there seems to be signs of collapse. There seems to be no signs of collapse of the Ukrainian ranks. In fact, we can say that the last important collapse of the Ukrainian army was Lysychansk, while the Russian collapses occur actually in September and October. So nowadays it's very difficult to say in which way the balance of victory is taken.
I actually really agree with that assessment. Based on a lot of the media environment right now and the things you read daily, whether it's from just mainstream media or Ukrainian media, European or pro-U.S. media. It's all talking about, or even Russian media. It's all talking about this big Russian offensive that's coming. They're talking about how Russia has, close to 500,000 troops waiting to enter the fight, and you have, just bad news after bad news after bad news, and it all seems like it's very bad for Ukraine. And on top of that, Russia has been launching these attacks all along the broad front line. But looking at that, looking at what's happened over the last month and a half, I think considering how pessimistic the outlook for Ukraine was going into this, I think honestly they've handled the situation pretty well. Surprisingly, in most of these specific battles, if you want to talk Kupiansk, Kremenna, Seversk, Bakhmut, Marinka, and Vuhledar, and we'll go ahead and throw oh, the town on the Zaporozhye front. I want to say it's not Oskil.
Orkiv? Orkiv, you mean?
Orkiv, yes.
Yeah,
If you look at all of these battles, most of these battles, Russia has seen little to no gains, and then over half of them, they've actually been thrown back. So impressively, the Ukrainians have managed to kind of fold the situation as better than expected for sure. So while Russia is entering the this next phase of the war with more resources and more manpower than Ukraine, my view of the Ukrainian situation isn't as pessimistic as it was, say 2 or 3 months ago. Now, if we're talking about long term in the war, I think it's I'm still pretty pessimistic about the outlook of Ukraine. Just based on numbers. And I think this was actually said pretty good in an update by a geopolitical analyst by the name of Peter Zion the other day, who's been very anti-Russian, very pro-Ukrainian, especially in the sources that he's been looking at for the war so far. But what he said was, even considering, like, pretend the casualty estimates for Russian forces are accurate, and the Ukrainians have been killing Russian soldiers at a rate of 3 to 1. He said basically it's impossible for Ukraine to win the war unless they're killing Russian soldiers at a rate of 10 to 1, just based on how much more manpower and how much more equipment that Russia has. So, in my opinion, despite the fact that Ukraine seems to be faring pretty well on the battlefield right now, all things considering, uh, it's definitely in their interest to seek a ceasefire as soon as possible. That's my opinion on the situation so far.
Alex, what do you think?
Well, for me, it's very hard to say because there's so much information that we don't have. We don't know the actual numbers of Ukrainian soldiers on the front or a number of Russian forces. Nobody knows for sure the amount of casualties, the amount of reserves that are left in terms of manpower and equipment. So we're talking with a lot of holes in our analysis, okay? And this is the big difference with military history, because a historian will look at this information. So it's always easier for military historians to talk about previous events when you have the full data. Now, well, you only have partial information. From my perspective, I think the focal point of the war in Ukraine right now is Bakhmut. Now, SuriyakMaps said that the last collapse of the Ukraine army took place in Lysychansk. Yes, but if you look at the current situation in Bakhmut, it's a almost copy paste. The only difference is that in Lysychansk, Ukrainians had 25,000 men, and in Bakhmut they involved at least 100,000. So of course, it's not going to be the same rate of advance of an attacking force when you have 4 times the amount of soldiers on basically the front that is the same size or even shorter. Soledar was one collapse in a few days. Nobody expected Soledar to fall so fast, and this is really a breakthrough moment, because when we look at the Russian advance in the north of Bakhmut, it all started from Soledar. If Soledar had holden still, if Ukrainians had still Soledar, the Russians would not have been able to really take Bakhmut. So the situation looks dark for Ukraine in Bakhmut. But once again, I don't have the full information. Perhaps Wagner is on its last legs. Perhaps they barely have any forces left. I don't know. All I know is that in the past few weeks, like let's say in the past 7 days, 10 days, one village after another is falling to Russian forces. And now there's maybe 3 kilometers until they reach the last supply line. So, my analysis depends on the map and not so much on what people say. And this is why I love you guys, THETI mapping, maps, because maps don't lie. So you see the progression and you can extrapolate information from there. So,
Alex, as a military history buff, I guess we'll say, does this Battle of Bakhmut stick out to you as a decisive battle in this war? Like, does it stick out on the level of battles like Stalingrad or Waterloo, Austerlitz, the Battle of Gettysburg? Like, does this stick out as a defining turning moment in this war? Is the victor of this battle going to come out with a great advantage over the other side, whether it's tactically speaking, positioning on the map, or if it's in terms of resources, or what do you think of that?
well, it's interesting because in Stalingrad in the last month alone, the Russians fired 33,000 artillery shells, the Soviets, on Stalingrad. 33,000 shells a day on Stalingrad. And in Bakhmut, we're talking about 15 to 17,000 a day. So there's definitely a very comparable amount of firepower. There's less troops involved because now, I mean, with the range of weapons and firepower, you need less troops to cover the ground. But still, it's the biggest battle of the Ukraine war at the moment. This is where everybody is sending their reserves. So of course you compare it to Stalingrad, but it's also too early to say something like this because Stalingrad, we use it as a center point because we know what happened after that. But some people say the Battle of Moscow in 1941 was the focal point. There's some noise in the background. Somebody.
Yeah, sorry.
And no, some people say that it was actually the Battle of Moscow that was the turning point because this is when the Germans, after that, they only had
downhill, right?
Yeah, downhill. So Bakhmut, it all depends. Let's say in the scenario, let's say the Russians push, and then the Ukrainians counterattack, and then the Russian front collapse. The Ukrainians go back to take Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. Then yes, it could be a big turning point. I don't think the Russians could recover from that. Equally, imagine the Russians continue their advance and encircle 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers in Bakhmut, and they have to surrender. What do you think would be the impact?
I think
that'd be pretty bad on morale for sure.
Yeah, so if you want to talk about the significance of Bakhmut specifically, then we also need to get a good understanding of what's surrounding it, the local geography and also the topography. So if you look at the area just to the west of it, then there you have this really significant high ground elevated area. It's around the Donbass water canal. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that the Ukrainians, they're probably trying to build defenses in that area right now, sort of as an intermediary line of defense in between the current Bakhmut-Seversk line and the one that we have with Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, of course. Now, the situation could become really, really difficult for the Ukrainians if their garrison within the city of Bakhmut itself becomes enveloped and they are just totally encircled, sort of in a Mariupol style. But I just don't see that happening because we've seen similar sort of cauldrons being formed in places like Krasnohora, Parskovivka, Solidar, and each time most of the Ukrainian forces are able to make it out. Maybe not cohesively as they would have wanted, but maybe they retreat in small groups and they're able to make it out effectively. So I think that we'll probably see something similar occur where they withdraw to Chasiv Yar, which is on the higher elevated area, maybe like 250 meters above sea level. And that's where they'll try to grind it out, again, sort of in a similar fashion to what they've been doing in Bakhmut, is trying to hold on for as long as possible, sending in as many reinforcements as possible from the rear, territorial defense units, and just trying to hold on as they build up more defenses in their main line around Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which is defended from the flanks.
That's if they manage to escape.
Yeah, it is. And right now, we know that they have one road that is working from Chromove, and the one from Ivanivske, we know that one has been destroyed. And even if it was working, then it's way too close to the front line. So really, they have one road left, and they have the open fields that are probably frozen.
I have the feeling that the Russians in Ukraine since 2014, they have been using this tactic that they want to avoid complete encirclements, because that you put your defender against the wall and then he's going to fight until death. Like at Mariupol, the siege lasted forever. So I think they always want to let one way out for all the troops to escape and bombard them as they leave. This is the Mongol strategy that
But that's
is.
what they always say,
That
right,
too.
about the Russians. But I'm
And
not even sure if it's true.
no, but because
entirely.
they did at the Battle of Debaltseve in 2015, I think, in the
Yeah.
January 2015. This is basically what happened. They create a cauldron, and as the Ukrainians were evacuating from this encirclement, the Russians bombarded them and fired, and it caused massive casualties. So I think, and for them, it would allow them to take the city of Bakhmut without a heavy urban battle. So I think they're gonna do everything to let them escape, and this is gonna cause chaos, because last thing. But what happens is that we see soldiers as individuals, but they're part of units, right? But if these units are all mixed up and they retreat in chaos, it's very complicated to have a coordinated defense after that. You know, so who's gonna command all this? It's gonna be a big mess.
Organization is key. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So if you have
Which is
20
why-
different units,
Right.
Which is why always the Russians always have reinforcement before a massive withdrawal. It's like the reinforcement has been reported,
Yeah.
at this location. Then after the next day they withdraw. Like,
it's the bad news.
then everybody say I'm lying.
But the Ukrainians did the same thing at Paraskovivka. I don't know. I think it's you that reported, Ukrainian reinforcements. I was like, okay, they're gonna leave. They're gonna leave
They did
because
that.
So what you're
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
that's the reinforcements are actually rear guard troops arriving to manage the retreat. That's interesting. I think it's interesting
Because that's what I think. That's what I
it's-
think. When I was reporting it, I was thinking, I think this looks like the covering force that they are trying to organize a organized retreat. So these forces is just there to protect the corridor. So that
100%.
as what Alex has said, as we withdraw, it will be very messy. So this organized troop where they are already briefed on their mission will be able to cover the defense. Because if you look at the cauldron, there's no way they can hold that position. So that's why. But I didn't say that because later if I'm wrong, then because the Ukrainians are always trying to hold all the grounds. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so
Ian,
I remember reporting around the same time about Paraskovivka, and I was keeping track of all the specific units. And from National Guard, they have the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade. I think that's what it's called. It's one of the units within the Ukrainian National Guard. It was reported, I don't remember from where, but I just remember moving the unit to there. And they were on the rear around Berkivka and some of the other towns that are really just to the south of Paraskovivka. They were sent in right before the withdrawal, so they were probably protecting the rear.
It's interesting what THETI said about the reasons why we're not seeing very many envelopments, and I wonder if that has something to do with the reduced number of troops that are necessary. Like what Alex was saying, you have a lot more firepower. You don't need as many men on the front line. Too many men in one place, you're just going to end up with more dead bodies. So like it's smarter to kind of trickle in the reinforcements as you need them. And these encirclements that you see, or these partial encirclements like Paraskovivka, Krasnogora, we were getting reports that there was as many as 1,500 troops in that area. I'm not sure if I actually believe that. I think possibly, it was much less. Like 500 men can cover quite a lot of ground with automatic weapons, RPGs, and autocannons on BMPs and stuff. So I think that in terms of when there's almost a complete encirclement, it probably is a lot easier to withdraw from it because you don't have situations like say in World War II moving across the steppe where you have 100,000 men crammed on a dirt road. Where you can't even get past each other, and tanks are moving so fast to get beyond you. That's the kind of thing that was happening in the German advance through Ukraine on the way through in the early stages of the war. and then again happening to the Germans on the way back. It's just too many men, too many units, too much attrition.
But I also think
there's
modern telecommunications are so good that there's no surprise anymore. So during World War II, when the Germans attacked, how many radios were there for the Soviets? So how many Russian units simply stood still because they had no idea what was going on?
What was it? It was 48 hours when the Russians crossed the Soviet border in Barbarossa, where Stalin just refused to believe it was going on and ordered everyone to stand down. So for
that,
2 days, Russian units were just getting wrecked, by these Germans, and they were just driving right past them. And finally, they decided to do something about it, and it was way too late.
And today, because of all the satellites and the communications, well, units are told of the latest developments. So they're told, okay, back up and all this. So it's much more complicated to have an actual encirclement.
So
Well,
yes,
sorry. I agree with Alex saying that. Sorry, my English is not good.
no problem.
Okay. What I say about the Russian strategy in Bakhmut is very similar to what happened in Syria with the Tiger forces, the elite of the Syrian army, which was supported by Russians against the ISIS. I remember in March 2017. Is the same. Is trying to make envelope movements to ISIS, forcing them to abandon their positions and shelling their position while they are living. But my perception is that there is a possibility that some Ukrainian units stay in the center of Bakhmut, basically because probably Zelensky wants a political victory, to say that by this way. So a similar scenario that Mariupol could take place. And I think it's a very big problem for Russians because trying to destroy a focus of resistance in the center of the city can weaken their offensive capabilities for further advances in the future. But on the other hand, leaving more troops out of the city of Bakhmut will suppose more problems for Russians if they want to, if Ukrainians want to counterattack in the future.
That's interesting. I actually kind of explored that idea the other day on my channel that it's at least possible that the Ukrainians might deliberately decide to allow an encirclement around Bakhmut and hunker down there, especially if they can manage to not allow the Russian units to move very far past Bakhmut. Like, let's say that the Ukrainians establish a defensive line along the canal, like what THETI mapping was suggesting. It's only like maybe 10 kilometers from Bakhmut. Not enough space for Russian units to be able to maneuver and conduct offensives on a canal line if they have 30,000 Ukrainian troops behind them, or 20,000 Ukrainian troops behind them in Bakhmut. So it really, I think that comes down to, like, is Ukraine prepared for that? Have they delivered tons and tons of ammunition to the the steel factory or wherever they would station their defense around? Did they have the food? Things like that. So
but there's sorry to cut you, but there's also an important aspect. You're 100% right. It's just, before I forget my idea, in Mariupol, the troops that were there were elite, so the Marines, Azov. So this is one factor why they held on for so long. But the troops in Bakhmut proper are territorial defense units for most. So how long are they really going to fight if they're in a circle? I don't know.
True.
THETI.
I mean, go ahead, Wyatt.
Oh, because THETI in his mapping, he tracks the units. So
Yeah.
what are the type of units in Bakhmut?
Yeah, so it is absolutely true that there are a lot of territorial defense units in there. Many of them were originally stationed on the border with Belarus, some of them on the border with Russia, and Sumy and Chernihiv, and they were moved in. Others were originally on the Zaporozhye front, but they were moved to the fighting in Bakhmut. So maybe those ones aren't as experienced because really the fighting in Zaporozhye wasn't really that wide scale up until recently. And then you also have some like more experienced battle-hardened forces in Ukraine. So just off the top of my head, you have the 93rd Brigade, which was that was one of the main fighting forces in the beginning of the war. You have the 57th Brigade, which fought in Kherson, and they were one of the first units to really lead a spearhead into the city. There are some others that I'm forgetting, but yeah, there were a lot of Ukrainian forces that were moved into Bakhmut that were battle-hardened as well.
I believe the first and it's either the 1st or the 4th Tank Brigade, or maybe it's the 17th Tank Brigade.
17th Tank Brigade is in northern Bakhmut at the moment, around the Stupka district.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't have known any of this. I don't follow the units at all. So
no, but
it's with THETI
I check them
this.
about once a week on the deployment map.
But the deployment
that's not
map,
always accurate.
yeah, it's not that accurate.
It's not that good. Like they don't update it that much, and obviously not the entire unit's just going to be stationed in one singular area.
Yeah.
And also they're not like at full capacity anyway.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm impressed with THETI's mapping, because he actually did his best to track, which is like wow. Because sometimes it's very confusing even for me when I was like, it's like who are all these people? Then if they are redrawn, you don't really know when they are redrawn, or when they are totally annihilated.
Yeah,
you wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
THETI, is your map publicly available?
Yeah, it is. I have it in the description to all my videos. Now, my unit map, to be fair, I can't say 100% for sure if each unit is stationed in that specific location, but I know generally where they are. Yeah, and who knows, maybe there was some sort of rotation that I'm not aware of, but I just go based off of footage that I see and other reports.
Maybe SuriyakMaps is like, ha, these people do not know what they are talking about.
No.
So, let me ask another question. So, what do you think of the Russia winter offensive? No, or do you think that the winter offensive haven't even started yet? No.
Well, that's the big debate right now for many people. In my opinion, they tried to do some things, but they're also not going balls to the wall. I think the main focus is Bakhmut, and they try to put pressure. But Vuhledar, they actually tried. I think they tried to do something there. They don't work out. I don't know. I'm not sure if they really want to attack for now. I think they want to hold the front.
Because until today, right, I still got people, when is the winter offensive starting? It was like, what?
Like, as if they don't see Bakhmut, what's going on?
So it's like I did mention, I think in the tweet, and also I mentioned during my one or two of my reports, I say the winter offensive is now in front of your eyes. It's already happening, and it's not one offensive, it's multiple offensives all across different fronts. So, but then, I still have questions like, so what do you guys think of the winter offensive?
So I would sort of echo what HistoryLegends was saying about Vuhledar. I think that was a real serious attempt because you saw how many reinforcements were moved into there from the 36th Brigade, 155th, I think it was Separate Naval Infantry Brigade. All these units that are in the Russian regular army, they were moved in, and they launched serious attacks several times over the course of several weeks onto Vuhledar. And we now know that failed. But I do believe that was different than the probing attacks that we saw on Zaporozhye, for instance, where you had really just small groups advancing through open fields, probing the Ukrainian defensive lines, and then eventually retreating, and then it sort of died down. And I think the reason why they did that in Vuhledar specifically is because attacking the Donbass itself head on is extremely difficult. We've seen this throughout history in World War II and in the Russian Civil War from 100 years ago. We know that attacking the defensive lines there head on is extremely difficult. So I think by getting control over the flanks, whether it be from Vuhledar or from the north, which is something that we'll talk about later, but specifically in Vuhledar, having a control of the southern flank so you could attack from a different direction and assault the Ukrainian defensive lines from an area that they may not have been expecting could be extremely lethal. And I think that the Russians, they were aiming towards the town of Kurakove, which is to the north of Vuhledar. And that town, it is sort of like a local command hub. You have a lot of artillery stationed over there that's used to fire upon the Russian forces. And it's also a big logistical hub where a lot of roads like lead to the front line, like in Marinka or to Vuhledar, like I said.
I also don't know the situation in the forest near Kremina. It's like a huge black hole. Like I don't even know the front line or who controls what. It's like just see forest footage and that's it.
Yeah,
Look at
it is really
SuriyakMaps map.
difficult to tell what's going on there. It's almost impossible to geolocate it, but you could tell it's the forest because it looks. I mean, it's really unique. It looks like all the trees were planted in like perfect rows or something. But
Yeah, it's a forest tree. It's actually not a forest. It's actually a forest tree. So they actually plant and then they chop.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
I thought it was a national park too, or something like that.
No,
Like it's
no. I think national park is the one near towards the church. Near the Liman region there. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in terms
Yes.
of winter offensive, it's difficult to tell. Like I think an opinion that's circulating a lot right now, which deserves some attention, is a tweet thread that was posted by Michael Kaufman. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He's a military analyst. Has been reporting on the Ukraine war since the beginning. Early on in the war, I actually thought that through all like the Western hysteria, he was given a more accurate view than others. So, I have a little bit of respect for his reporting. But he had mentioned, or his thesis was basically that there wasn't going to be a grand new frontline opening, a new Russian offensive, and the Russian winter offensive is what we are seeing now. These attacks that are all over the front line, and Russia was probably going to just feed in this manpower pool they have to sustain combat for as long as they can until they have to bring up some more reservists, some more another mobilization, right? So it's possible, but I think one thing that he overlooked is, for the most part, the locations that the Russians are conducting attacks. The places that we've been talking about: Vuhledar, Marinka, Bakhmut, and then kind of a ring around Seversk, like have been the same locations that the Russians have been trying to push almost the entire war. There's been battles almost on a daily basis in these places. Now, like there were some additional like attempts, like Orekiv. There was obviously a pretty serious attempt to try and storm Vuhledar, which I, personally, just looking at the map, I think it's probably one of the most strategic places on the entire line in terms of like the value of like one small, like, 3 square kilometer area. Like it's highly valuable, sits on a hill. You're looking at 8, 9 story apartment buildings. It's basically a fortress that commands the entire area. So, I can to argue like against that point. I think that in total, in terms of like manpower, Russia has spent over the last 2 or 3 months, I would say I would estimate it probably uh, between like 15 and 50,000 is like a high estimate, right? Which I don't necessarily believe. I think that in terms of these winter attacks, that's probably dead, wounded, what they would have used up, and that's kind of maybe being a little generous, but they have 300,000 that they mobilized, and there's a pretty good study that suggests that 300,000 was more or less the propaganda number. Like that's what the Russian government told the population, so things would stay calm. There was a study done on marriage rates throughout Russia, which tend to spike in terms of mobilization. You have soldiers that if they get killed in combat, a payout goes to their family, goes to their wife. So guys that have girlfriends, they've never really tied the knot, they end up getting married kind of like real quick, off the cuff. Maybe they elope or something because so and so is about to deploy and you don't know if they'll die, so they want their girlfriend to have have the money. So you see a spike in marriage rates all over Russia, and they did the math, and they estimate that it's probably more like 500,000 Russian troops that were mobilized rather than 300,000, which I think is very interesting because on one hand you have Western media claiming that Russia is struggling with mobilization and they're not getting all the soldiers they need, and on the other hand you have some mainstream media sources saying, oh no, it's actually the other way around. Russia's just lying to their population. They pulled up more people.
You
So
know,
it's hard to tell which is the truth, but
This
the
number
study
came up a
actually
lot,
has some data behind it. So I
there's
subscribe to
a
that a little more.
YouTuber that even said it. I think it's a French YouTuber at one point, but he lives in Russia on and off. But he said in the live, he said, yeah, from what he saw, there's a lot more people that were mobilized from what he saw. And a lot of people went to the recruitment offices, way more than 300,000. And he already said it in October, November, like even before. He said it's a lot more people than we think. Some even said that the mobilization was continuing. So people still get the summons.
Oh,
They don't
I
really talk
believe it. I
about it.
mean,
So
when you look at even the United States, or there's so much talk about like inexperienced conscripts and things like that. But World War II, the majority of the U.S. Army fighting in Europe was conscripts. They were all drafted. Like that's what conscripts are. They're drafted in the army. They didn't volunteer. Now, the ones that are more competent, have more confidence in themselves and think they can make a difference, they end up going in advance and volunteering because they're more likely to pick the unit, right? Like that's the big thing with the 101st or the 82nd Airborne in World War II is, they didn't want to be in a foxhole with the draftees, so they volunteered. That way they're fighting beside the best. You have to assume that the same thing's going on in Russia too, that when there's a big conscription, a big draft, that of course you're going to have draft dodgers. There's, potentially millions of people in World War II that tried to dodge the draft from whatever country that they were in. Like there's always going to be people that don't want to fight, but there's also always going to be people that are feeling patriotic. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's a new map floating around of where they've asked people in different European countries, would they be willing to fight for their country? And at the top of the list, the highest percentages of populations that are willing to take up arms to defend their country is Russia, Ukraine, and Finland, and I believe Turkey as well. So like there's definitely a lot of patriots in Russia. There's definitely a big volunteer pool, bigger than what people are suggesting. But my main point with all that is I don't think Russia has expended enough manpower and resources through these winter attacks in these different places on the front line in order to um, count out a new
Hello,
offensive. They
everyone.
still have the power in order to conduct a new offensive. What's up, Weeb Union?
Hello.
Yeah,
late to the party.
yeah. And he froze immediately. He's like, you cannot mention his name. Once you say his name, he's like,
But it's very interesting. But because of this, the fact that there's so many troops that are supposedly mobilized, plus the supposedly volunteers, plus the guys that were conscripted last April, all the young guys, 18, 19-year-olds that were conscripted and that will finish their conscription in April. All this, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of manpower. The Russians are building a lot of tanks and all this. I'm like, this is why people are like, okay, what's the next step? Why would they mobilize everything if their goal would be to just freeze the conflict or something?
I got a question for SuriyakMaps. There is the Zaporizhzhia offensive by the Russians, and there is a lot of conflicting information. And SuriyakMaps is one of the first to say that the advances by the Russians are actually not that big. SuriyakMaps, do you have anything to talk about the Zaporizhzhia offensive by the Russians?
Well, I agree with what they say about the mobilization because at the beginning of the month, I received information that the training of mobilization people have started. So that means that new people are arriving to the the space of the special military operation. So it's not discarded that the number of mobilized people are higher than the news said. Um, my opinion is that a big offensive will take place eventually, actually. And during the last weeks, I read a lot of reports saying that the winter offensive have already started with the capture of Soledad. But my opinion is that Soledad fall basically because Yakovlivka fall. This is something that will is gonna happen eventually, and Ukrainians know. This is why they put a lot of resistance. But finally, with the capture of Soledar, the Russian troops were able to penetrate into the Bakhmut valley. Um, as far as I can see, during the last weeks, the mobilized troops that have arrived to the front have increased the number of troops sufficiently in order to launch a series of simultaneous attacks in order to break the line of the defenses, not only in Donbass, but also in Zaporizhia. However, I think that all of these attacks that we see is more like probing attacks, with the exception of Bukhledar, in which ISIS is more related with what is happening in Marinka, that now Russians are trying to move southwards of the town in order probably to create a new envelope movement to relieve the pressure to the southern part of Donetsk city. But my perception is that during the next weeks, probably Russia will open a second front, try to divert more Ukrainian troops from the whole region of the Donbass, and with that, the consequence of the weakening of the Ukrainian defenses. The
You know,
question is where are open this front? This is the real question.
I always had this image that Ukraine is doing this force to attack on the Zaporozhye front line. This is what they're saying, okay? But what if the moment Ukraine attacks on the Zaporozhye line, Russia attacks from Belarus against Kiev? You know, what if they launch, and this time not 20, 30,000 men, but they launch 100,000 men on the capital while Ukraine is in the middle of its Zaporozhye offensive? This would be very complicated.
So usually, if you play strategy games, usually that is actually one of the ways you stop an enemy attack. So instead, if you are under siege and you know that you cannot actually defeat that siege, the best thing you can do is actually attack their base. You just go around the other side, attack their base. They will have to, because if they are doing an attack, then they are less likely to be very well defended, and they will have to make a difficult decision: should I continue, or should I defend what I have first? So, and most of the time, the person who is on the offensive will actually pull back the forces to defend the more vital places.
But and I was thinking about it. How do you hide hundreds of thousands of men in the modern age with
Yeah.
all the satellites? Okay, so for me, this makes it very unlikely that they would attack against Kharkiv or Sumy, because satellites would just see these concentrations. However, in Belarus, the fact that Belarusian soldiers are mobilized, the fact that there's huge forests and everything, we don't know if it's actual Russian soldiers or if it's Belarusian soldiers. We don't know. We only see equipment moving, troops. It's very confusing to me, at least. So, like you said, the threat, just having this threat on the capital could make it that the Ukrainians don't even launch their offensive in the spring and perhaps wait. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
so
that
if you look at the geography, again, around the Kiev area, as you said, History Legends, it's extremely forested, but that was part of the reason why the initial advance onto Kiev was stopped in the first place. You had a lot of these Ukrainian formations that weren't as experienced in warfare, so they really operated irregularly within the forests, and they're able to stop the advancing Russian formations that were advancing through very narrow highways. And the Ukrainians, they were conducting these hit and run attacks on the Russian columns, and a lot of them were embedded within the forest. Now, I know the dynamics change now, and that if an offensive was launched towards Kiev, it would be with more than just 20,000 people. It would be with, like, as you said, 100,000 people. But I just don't see that as being feasible at the moment because of the main Russian focus being around the current front line to the east and to the south. But if we see video circulating of buildups, that could just be an effort by the Russians to divert some Ukrainian forces towards the border with Belarus in order to fix them in those positions as they conduct offensives elsewhere. Because we've seen for a while now, based on the troop formations and where they're located, we're seeing that a lot of them are on the border with Belarus, and a lot of them are just building up defensive fortifications. They've been doing that since April, and nothing has really come out of that. And those forces, think of it, they could have been moved into some of the key areas that we're now seeing fall to the Russian forces.
But what do you think of, in the previous video, I mentioned this. What if the Russians don't actually go directly for Kiev, but for Chernihiv? So they mass their forces on Chernihiv, which would open the east bank of Kiev. That way, it would, in my opinion, cause a lot of damage. Because in this area, it's less forested. Like you said, the problem of the Russian failure in Kiev is one, they didn't have enough forces, and two, they had spread out their forces on two banks. So the Ukrainians benefited from this central position, so they could punch the Russians. But if the Russians mass all their forces on one bank, on Chernihiv, I don't know.
You definitely have to consider. I'm sorry. Just real quick point with what you're saying with Kyiv. The infrastructure in the area is quite terrible compared to even, well, I mean, not necessarily the quality of the infrastructure, just the quantity of it. I mean, and this is kind of cliche, like it comes up all the time, but you know, with 20 to 30,000 troops driving down from Belarus into Kyiv, and you had this, everyone of course remembers the pictures of the convoy backed up on the roads, spotted from the satellites and stuff. Imagine, 50,000 or 100,000 troops trying to advance on Kyiv through that same axis, along those same highways. Like there's just, in my opinion, the evidence kind of showed that for a force of even, like let's say an army grouping or an army corps, 20, 30,000 troops really didn't have the logistical capabilities to operate in those areas north of Kyiv that they were operating in. So I do believe that should the second front happen again, or should the Russians use Belarus to enter Ukraine again, it's probably more likely to be in Chernihiv and Sumy regions. The infrastructure near Gomel, Kursk, Belgrade, it's far better than it is. I mean, the areas where the Russians entered Ukraine, people forget, was the Chernobyl exclusion zone, right? I mean, the roads up there haven't been paved since 1980. Like they're like the whole area is just empty and devoid of resources. So I do think that what Alex is saying about Chernihiv is far more likely.
And
let me just say this after.
Sorry.
And to add to that, if I can add to that, something that indicates that the Ukrainians are expecting an offensive by the Russians towards Chernihiv is the fact that they are building a lot of troops in specifically Chernihiv rather than Kiev or the west. They're just putting minefields there to make sure that there's no flanking attack. But their troop buildup is in Poltava, which is in the actual center of eastern Ukraine, so they can go anywhere it is needed, and in Chernihiv. And then there were some rumors, I'm not sure if it's true, I haven't fact-checked it, but there were some rumors that the administration in Chernihiv had been fired and that they replaced it with military soldiers who had to take control over Chernihiv. So if that is true, then the Ukrainians are expecting somewhere an attack against Chernihiv. And then if we look at the Polish colonel, or whatever his rank was, I don't remember, who made a plan about the Russians' offensive. I made a video about that. he essentially says that there will be a grouping of Russian forces attacking from Belarus towards Chernihiv, but it will just be a distraction. It will not be the main force. The main force will come from Sumy, and they will use a tactic that they've been training for a long time, where essentially the goal is to mobilize all of their forces for the offensive in 3 days. And then he refers to a 2017 operation called Sapad, where they essentially mobilized all of the major grouping of forces, about 30,000 troops, in only 3 days. And that they have practiced this yearly. And then they are planning to use this tactic to strike at Sumy. And then after that 3 days operation, they will start mobilizing their real forces to come in a second wave after the initial force.
So I think that's pretty interesting what you're bringing up with like this large scale offensive would sort of be like in a Soviet style manner, because it would be in like this large divisional structure. But I think that's different than the current Russian army structure, which is more focused on battalion tactical groups, where you really have these smaller assault forces, but they do have a lot of firepower at their disposal, and they have like their commands very close to the front line. So because of that reason, I think the most likely area where a front could be opened up is just to the south of Belgorod and to the east of Kharkiv. So in an area around like Vovchansk and around Veliki Burluk, because the point would be that the Russians would advance along that axis and retake Izium. And this would isolate the Ukrainian groupings around the Svatove-Kremina line that are trying to push towards the Russian defenses over there. And so that would give Russia control of Izium again, and it would also allow them to reopen pressure on Slavyansk, which would again aid them in their effort to advance along the Donbass, which I think is currently their main focus.
And in support of what you said, the Russians are currently doing these staging attacks against the city north of Kupiansk, Dvorvine, or what's the name?
Dvorchine.
Yeah, exactly. And they're creeping their way towards this area. I'm not sure what the plan is, but we see that they're creeping their way towards Kupiansk and this entire area. Maybe they could, one attack that they could do would be to attack Kupiansk from the north and then push towards Liman in the south and kind of trap the Ukrainian army on the east side of the Oskol River. Because honestly, opening a new front is also very complicated from a logistical perspective. So if they just push in the same area, but with more men, perhaps that would be more of the Russian capabilities at the moment.
Regardless of what happens, I actually see that particular stretch of line of border that THETI mapping is talking about as being highly likely. Like even if Russia decides to enter through Belarus, Chernihiv, Sumy, I don't see a situation where they don't try to cross the border in Kharkiv Belgorod region. And the main reason why there is because there's an absolutely vital supply line that's been cut in half essentially because of the Ukrainian Kharkiv offensive. So there is a train line that comes down from Veluki, I believe. I'm not as good as pronouncing these places as you guys. It goes down through Dvorichna and Kupiansk, and then from Kupiansk it turns to Svatova. So about like 55% of that rail line is under Russian control right now, and the rest is under Ukrainian control. The Russians really need to retake Kupiansk and push the Ukrainians back far enough to where their artillery can't hit that railroad constantly so they can use it. And the primary reason for that is there's actually no rail connection from Lysychansk and Severodonetsk to Russia right now. I believe they can get rail logistics as far up as Lugansk coming from the south, but I think all the railroads in between 2014 Lugansk Donetsk front lines and Severodonetsk have been destroyed, and the Kupiansk Svatova Severodonetsk rail line is actually the only one that was left in existence, and the Russians were using it before the Ukrainian offensive, and now they can't. So by freeing that up, they actually greatly relieve the situation in northern Lugansk in terms of supplies.
To add to that, I will continue with this Polish strategy. He mentions the first step being the attack on Sumy, but after that, he mentions that the Ukrainians would respond to that by sending their Poltava force, that they are preparing for the offensive to react to the Russian offensive. And then the Russians will initiate step 2, where they will attack along the western bank of the Oskil River, where they will then cut off the Ukrainian force from the Donbas region so that they cannot react to that. So the Poltava force will fight alone the Russian force, after which the second wave will come in and overpower the Ukrainian force. And then once the Donbas force is in disarray because of this, they will attack from the Zaporizhia front as well. So a 3-pronged attack from the west of the Oskil River, from the Sumy region, and from Zaporizhia.
From the Russians, the fact that I don't know if they can actually pull this off, the Russians. Honestly, I'm saying I'm not sure if they can pull off such a... because it requires a lot of coordination. So, but I'm curious of what SuriyakMaps thinks and THETI mapping of the Ukrainian capabilities on the Zaporozhye front to regain Crimea. What do you guys think?
So I believe, based on the troop rotations that we've seen over the past few months, that any sort of offensive by Ukraine deeper into Zaporozhye, like Tokmak, Melitopol, these key logistical hubs, it's not really feasible at the moment because they've moved a lot of their territorial defense units from the line of contact around Zaporozhye into Bakhmut, like I said before. So until the situation is resolved over there, they can't really do anything in Zaporozhye. For the moment, I think they're just trying to build up defenses, not actually going on the offensive, especially with Russia trying to probe the line in Zaporozhye. So no, I don't see an offensive in the coming months.
Suryaks?
2 months ago, I would say that the Ukrainian army was very prepared to take Melitopol. But with the latest battles in the Eastern Front around Bakhmut, many Ukrainian troops go to this sector of the front line. And now the capabilities of the Ukrainian army are very small in that region. And the problem of Zaporizhia front is a wide front, very exposed to the artillery, not only from the Ukrainian side, but also from the Russian side. So unless Ukrainian army manage to get enough reinforcements, and in addition with the new materials that are arriving from the Western countries, I don't see any possibility of a spring offensive to take Melitopol and then reach the Azov Sea in the coming months. No.
Because because the Zaporizhia situation is very interesting. The from my point of view was that the Ukrainians have been reinforcing and trying, maybe planning to do their own offensive. And then Bakhmut happened. Bakhmut become so critical. They started to pull forces away from Zaporizhia. Then the Zaporizhia offensive appeared, the Russian one. Then after that, the Ukrainians panicked. They start to reinforce again the Zaporizhia area. Then the entire Russian offensive just stopped, like after just 3 days. Then it's like, maybe we should then give some credence to maybe there is a diversionary attack by the Russians to waste the logistic situation, or the Ukrainians are putting force here and there. But that's from my point of view. So until now, I still do not know who will actually do the attack. Yeah. I got another question. Maybe the last question before we go into the Q&A, because we are now at 59 minutes. So what is the situation for Transnistria? So we have these 2 days, the biggest topic is Transnistria. It actually went trending on Twitter as well. So what do you guys think? Will the Ukrainians actually try to do something? Because the Russian MOD is making a huge statement about this. Anyone want to start first?
Can I quickly talk about Bakhmut first?
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so about Bakhmut, as you have all said, Ukrainians send a lot of troops, reinforcements from all the other fronts to Bakhmut to hold it. And yet the Wagner PMC is still managing to close in on encircling it. And then a very interesting statement came from an Israeli army officer. I don't know exactly what his rank is, but he said that the Russians are most definitely, it sounded like he had no doubt, that the Russians have built a mechanized division in the rear of the front in Bakhmut, which is just waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Similar to Lysychansk, when they were essentially close to encircling Lysychansk, a Russian armored division just went around and encircled everything, which forced the Ukrainians to retreat. But in this scenario, it looks like they're waiting for a moment where the Ukrainians will be unable to retreat, because very soon we'll see the mud coming front because of the weather changes, which makes it difficult for the armored divisions to pass through. However, on the map, the Russians now control the highway from south around the Soledar area all the way to halfway to Sloviansk. If they make use of that highway, they'll be able to go around and reach the canal. And then by passing through and controlling the canal, they'll be able to cut off all the Ukrainian forces. So maybe the Russian plan is looking somewhat like that, cut off the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. And with such a huge loss of soldiers for Ukraine, it will spell a huge issue for them to properly defend the whole front line. And that will be the perfect moment for a Russian offensive.
Okay, so we will skip the Transnistria question. I leave it to you guys to do video on your YouTube channels. Don't review your opinions first, or we can answer if anyone asks actually in the Q&A. So because I think Weeb Union is running, may need to run soon, and Alex definitely need to run soon. So no, we're going to Q&A right now, and Weeb Union just disappeared. So his objective is to talk about Bakhmut and gone. So
he had something he wanted to say.
Yeah, this Bakhmut you must digit. Okay, man. So I want to address the first question. This one first because this is to Alex. Oh, he's back. He's back. Even though the front line don't move much, the map is not lying. A lot can still happen on the battlefield when it comes to attrition and so on.
I don't know how to answer to this.
I don't think it's actually a question.
No, it's not a question.
Okay.
It's
not a question. Okay.
Wait. I can. Even though the front line don't move much, the map is not lying. A lot can happen on the battlefield. Of course, a lot can still happen. And like I said at the beginning, the fact that we don't know the actual strength and losses of each unit, the ammo left, the reserves that are left, it's very hard to actually know and predict, right? But so the only marker we have right now is the map because of the unknown of everything else. That's why I'm saying the map is not lying, because that's the only real marker we have.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through the super chats first. So for those that want to ask questions, you want us to must answer your question, you must put the super chat. If not, then later we'll just pick from the comments. So Kosovo is Serbia. Okay. I don't know what is this. For the 5 chats in one stream. Oh yeah, thank you so much. But I will take all the money. This is done already. There will be 4 leopards from Poland today. How long until we see one destroyed?
So yeah. I think, like this thing with, I mean, everyone's talking about armored vehicles, and I've been talking about it a lot on Twitter, and everyone talks about, like you hear the same thing over and again. Like they all fare up the same to anti-tank guided missiles. They're all going to die because of anti-tank guided missiles, and it's not necessarily the truth, right? Like, I mean, if you know what you're doing, and if you hit a vehicle in the right spot, you can kill it with one shot. If you work in a javelin instead of an AT4 or an RPG-7, some of this stuff, you can, probably stand a lot better chance of the one shot, one kill. But it's really a mathematical, statistical problem. Like this armor, sometimes a tank will get hit, and it'll get hit in such a way that it'll take out a track, right? And the tank works just fine, but the track's out. The crew abandons the tank. Whoever wins that battlefield gets that tank, right? So like, and that's a big thing. You see the West has been supplying advanced recovery vehicles, right? Like they're basically specialized trucks that can go out onto the battlefield. They have the equipment to quickly hook up grab a damaged or downed vehicle and drag it off the field so they can take it back and repair it. And I mean, for lack of better way to describe what I'm talking about, we're going to like name this the trickle back rate, right? So there's a specific number of tanks, and this is the same way with manpower. Like soldiers that get, you get shot in the arm, spend a week or two we're medical, and then they're cleared to get back out on the front line or something like that. Every army, like whether it's for equipment or for manpower, they have a trickle back rate, and whatever you can do to increase that number is vitally important. Like if Ukraine could manage to pull back 5% more of their hit vehicles and repair them and get them back on the front, like that, could mean, hundreds more dead Russian soldiers and, hundreds of Ukrainian lives saved potentially. And some of these Western vehicles that are being sent to Ukraine, while they're not showing up in extremely large numbers, they are pretty well armored. Like Challengers are notoriously considered the most armored tank in the world. Leopards, yes, we've seen plenty of destroyed pictures of Leopards in Syria and stuff, but it is they do have better armor than Russian T-72s, T-80s. And I don't really know about T-90s. So like some of these tanks, if used properly, can be pretty effective. Now, is 14 enough to make like a difference? No, absolutely not. And I'm not saying that, but like I am saying that like to the people expecting 14 leopards to be destroyed on the battlefield next week, you're going to be holding your breath for a very long time. It's possible it could be a month or two before we see one of these things destroyed. It could be a month or two before we even see them on the front. They could be staging in Poltava or Chernihiv or wherever, waiting to repulse some kind of assault.
But there's one thing that we don't know is how they fare against guided artillery shells. So yeah, we know how they fare against anti-tank and mines because of the war in Syria, but we have no idea how they would fare. So this is going to be
I would say a direct hit from an artillery shell, guided or unguided, is probably more devastating than a ATGM. It's just projectiles moving much faster. I mean, in terms of explosive power, maybe not the same, but it's really just the velocity in my mind. Just intuitively thinking that probably is less survivable. But a tank can get hit in the engine block. A tank can get shot by another tank. The shell could explode inside the cabin, kill the crew. The tank can work just fine. A shell can hit the transmission. A shell can hit the gun. All these things, if it's just one issue, they could be dragged off the field, repaired, and sent back to the fight. It happens all the time. I mean, we see dozens and dozens and dozens of videos of whether Russians and Ukrainians recovering vehicles from the battlefield that have probably been logged somewhere as destroyed, when they're not.
So next question, why does the Russian leadership so calm and the Ukrainian leadership always look so on edge?
Well, it's kind of easy because the Russians produce all the military equipment they need and they have the resources. So maybe they keep calm as a facade, like as a wall. They don't like to show emotions, but they also have the resources. Ukraine doesn't have resources. They depend on the West. And if they don't make noise, the West is going to forget about them.
Yeah, exactly.
I would consider
the Russians.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So the Ukrainians, they're in a war of survival at the moment. And so, as HistoryLegends said, it's an act of desperation. Any sort of show of weakness could actually gain them leverage in the minds of the politicians in the West. And so maybe they aren't actually in such a devastating situation as they portray it to the public and to the media. Maybe it's just a means by which to accrue more weapons or accrue more aid and support.
Yeah, so I agree. I agree entirely. And just to add to that, I wouldn't consider the emotions of a politician to be any kind of indicator of anything. Like these, they're professional actors. I mean, Zelensky himself was an actor before he was president. So, and I have to say, in terms of like how they're acting in the news media and on the international stage, is in a way, like if the goal is to get max sympathy, has been flawless. Like they have really milked the international media seemed very, very well. So to say that like there's something wrong with them acting desperate and the Russians acting calm and collected, I mean, it's worked out for them so far.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question. How many kilometers is Bakhmut to Dnipro? Actually, you can just measure on Google Maps right now. This is a very funny question. How much further does Russia have to go? Very far. Very, very far. I mean, you just look at the
I'll get you
advances.
the answer to that while you're reading the next question.
Prigozhin said
On the map
3
now.
years of fighting up to the Dnieper.
Yeah, you got it there. Yeah, Prigozhin said 3 years. So he's the most honest guy in the entire Russian side. So,
So in
it
kilometers,
has to be true.
yeah.
200 kilometers or it's like 210 kilometers or it is 130 miles from Bakhmut to Dnipro.
So 1 kilometer, you take 1 week, so you go and count.
Yeah,
200 weeks. Oh my god. Okay, next question. Can you invite Douglas McGregor to your live stream? I actually tried to invite him for the super panel, but then he didn't even reply me. Only his secretary replied me. The secretary said he's not free, just on one-liner. So I feel a bit sad. Yeah, I got emotional damage from that email. I was like, what? I'm not important enough. So are there logistic issues to referring to the Wagnerians? Any?
Yes, but apparently they were solved recently. So I think there's semi-truth. We always talk about logistical issues, but I think the big problem for Russia with Wagner is that it's still a private military unit, and they kind of do the things on their own. And the Russians want to make sure that Wagner knows that who's the boss. So sometimes I think they hold back ammunition on purpose just to tell them, look at who's the boss.
I think it's also very interesting that, as much as we say that Wagner's is private military contractors, they have their own stuff and shit, they still depend on the Russian military to supply them the ammunition. So, it's not like Wagner is on their own kind of thing. They are still very dependent on the Russian military. I think that is actually both sides showing each other who's the boss kind of thing.
I mean, Wagner has planes, but they don't have air bases, so they have to be pretty deeply integrated with Russian military. Right?
Yeah. So, what do you think about Scott's assertion about yesterday that Russia will be in trouble by summer when Western supplies and aid kick into overdrive? Did he say that?
I'm not sure if he said that.
No, I don't think he said that.
No.
What he said was that if he said that the West will not be able to hold, will not be able to continue to supply the Ukraine by summer. So Ukraine will actually collapse by summer. But if the West decide to really go into overdrive, into wartime economy, then Russia will be in trouble. I think that's what he said. So let's go to the next question.
I agree with that statement. If that's how it was said, that would...
So the Russia, because of long years of conscription, has a trained manpower of 10 to 15 million. The 600K conscript times 220 to 25. So this is not a question anyway. Just next. Why is Avdiivka such a hard nut to crack?
Simply because there's not many Russian soldiers there. It's not that it's actually a hard nut to crack. It is well fortified, but it's fortified just like any place. It's just that when you look at the map, and I think THETI can be more accurate with what I'm going to say, is that there's only a few DPR battalions there. They're not the most well equipped. There's not a lot of artillery, so the Russians don't have really an advantage there. So they're creeping their war forward, but for them, it's not a priority at all.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at the map and that the units deployed in this area, it's mainly just DPR forces. Some of them are actually pretty good because they
Somalia.
Somali battalion.
Sparta.
You have Sparta, exactly, and they are around Opitny, Vodiane, in this general area just to the south of Avdiivka. But they can't conduct major breakthroughs past the Ukrainian defensive fortifications over here, especially because they aren't receiving that much artillery support. The Russians are usually the ones that are firing the artillery shells, but there obviously is more of an emphasis on other fronts. And of course, Avdiivka itself is a rather large city. I think the population pre-war was like 20,000. And there's some pretty large industrial facilities in the northern part of the city. There's a lot of fortifications on the outskirts, and you do have some sizable Ukrainian garrisons within the city. I know just off the top of my head, you have the 36th Separate Marine Brigade, which was generally in that area since I last checked. So yeah, there's not really a push towards Avdiivka itself, But I do know that the Russians and the DPR forces are trying to push towards the town of Pervomaisket, probably in an effort to maybe later on reach the town of Orlivka, which is one of the last towns remaining with the supply of Divka.
You know, quickly, just one sentence. If Bakhmut falls, it would be interesting to see if the Wagner Corps goes against Avdiivka. You know, they could like redirect and maybe mop up the thing.
So
2 minutes and I'll
Ian
have
drop
to
off.
go to 2 minutes and
Okay.
I'll have to go to.
Kuma, you're a super spammer jerk. Okay, next. When would the Western production come into play as Ukrainian advantage? Also, how would the capability change, and why is Zaporizhzhia line so tough for both sides?
When would the higher production? Well, the problem is that the production, it's going to take at least a year, you know, by the time they start and all this. It's going to take a while. But they already started. I think Poland has stepped up its production. Yeah.
So next question. Crispy Lemon is lonely. So no, hope you get some attention. For THETI and Suriyak, in case you don't know, Crispy Lemon is Krusty Liman. That's DPA. Yeah, that's DPA talk. You know, that's the nickname. So why don't the Russians take the North Ukraine and trade for Donbass? That's an interesting thought.
Well, because I think this is what they this is the plan number one they tried in February 2022. I think that was the goal, but the north is very forested and you need a lot of infantry, so you know it's a bit complicated.
Yeah, they sent in like.
And also the percentage of Russian-speaking people are very low, so there will be a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
If you look at Putin's speech, which occurred exactly a year ago, in it, a big emphasis was put on liberating, quote unquote, the people of Donbass, Donetsk, Lugansk. So again, that was really their big focus after the beginning attacks in February, March on major Ukrainian cities like Kiev and Chernihiv. Once they realized that they were overextended and that they didn't have the manpower and logistics necessary to consolidate control over these key areas, they withdrew, regrouped, and began attacking Donbass.
So, attritional. We are going to get a lot of attrition as Alex will start to drop off very, very soon. Just to let you guys know first, Ian already dropped off. He got something else on. So, Mami asks, why do you think Russia will have enough industrial? Do you think Russia will have industrial capacity to keep the war going with the amount of losses and usage of the ammunition? I mean, it's relative, right? This kind of thing is relative, because if Ukrainians do not have that and they are start to get less and less intense, the Russians don't really need to be that intense in terms of this artillery shelling. What do you think?
I think they'll have the capabilities. They have obviously large stockpiles from Soviet era, and if I recall correctly, they've just started ramping up production again of 152 millimeter bullets. So,
and we also don't know, like maybe they're getting some from their allies too, so we don't really know about the true things going in the back, we know a big communist country next to them, I'm not going to name anyone, that has a lot of ammunition, so
in something that looks very yellow and very badly drawn,
and that has a lot of ties with them,
We have heard during the last months that Russia is going to lose all of these stock ammunition, but the reality is that every day a lot of trains are carrying military vehicles into the frontier. So I think Russia is prepared for a attrition war of many years.
Yeah.
So assessment of casualties. This one of those always have questions.
I made a video about it, so if you want my idea.
Yeah, watch the History Legend video. I think that's actually as good.
Yeah, it's really good video.
Yeah.
But SuriyakMap, quickly, do you know? What's your estimate?
I don't like to do estimations with this because there's a lot of propaganda behind the numbers of deaths. But my perception is that if we sum all the Russians and Ukrainian deaths, the civilians, and even the wounded people, probably the casualties have already reached 100,000. But I think the statement of 3,000 Ukrainian soldiers died or 150 Russian soldiers died are not true. I think it's really propaganda.
Okay.
All right, everyone. This is where I'm going to leave you guys. So it was a pleasure talking to all of you. Once again, another brilliant panel. Thank you for organizing everything we had.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you guys. THETI mapping and SuriyakMap. Great work, guys. See you.
Yeah. See you, Alex. So we'll finish the last few questions. We still have like just a few more to go. I think. Yeah, just a few more. So Surovikin or Gerasimov?
I mean, in terms of like personally, I have no idea, but in terms of like strategy, I guess Surovikin, he contributed a lot to stabilizing the front line for Russia after their catastrophe in Kharkiv. And he did make some very difficult decisions on the Russian side by withdrawing from Kherson. But I think that generally his strategy has led to just more stable front line for the Russians. It's allowed them to build defensive positions in Svatova Kremina and in the rear in Zaporozhye. And also, he has been willing to utilize more airstrikes on critical infrastructure like substations and electrical power grids and that such stuff. So I guess he's better as a general.
Surya,
yes,
what do you think?
I think that there's a lot of critiques regarding Surovikin, but the fact is that Surovikin was actually assigned in order to resolve all the problems that the Russian army have accumulated since the beginning of the military operation in Ukraine. So I don't think Surovikin was a bad general. Also, I see many applications in the Ukrainian scenario very similar to what happened in Syria, especially the use of the increase of artillery during the last months is a tactic very similar to what the Syrian army did in the Idlib offensive.
Very interesting, because I didn't follow the Syrian conflict very closely. So you are the expert here. So next question. Are the Donbas nationalist veterans climbing up the hierarchy? Any idea?
I actually don't think they are. I don't know this for sure, but I have heard that now that the 1st and 2nd Army Corps, which are the military formations of Donetsk and Luhansk, are being integrated into the Russian military. The Russians are replacing the higher ups, maybe like the officers, with the Russian officers and starting to take over and filling up the ranks with their own. So I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's what annexation brings you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a hard one. When will Russia make a big push? Will it drag on like it is now? Make your bets. He is betting Bakhmut and Liman or Marinka Voleda falls. I'm so confused with the question. What do you guys think? Do you guys understand?
I mean, I guess in the big picture, I assume that Russia attempts at least to make gains on a different front. Like I said before, would probably be around Belgorod and pushing into Izium and Slavyansk later on. But none of these like really major big air offensives. I just can't see that going on at the moment for reasons that we've talked about before in terms of logistics and in terms of the full scale needed to launch such a major offensive against a full-fledged army in Ukraine. So yeah, I would assume that for the time being, it's going to just remain attritional in nature.
I see that it's not necessary to end Bakhmut or Buledar offensives. I think that a big push can be made simultaneously with the other operations, and I think it's necessary in order to divert as much as Ukrainian forces as you can to do that. My perception is that, well, we have talked about opening a front in the western side of the Oskil River, and I think it's very reliable because Russia has many interests to retake all the lost area that they had to retreat last September. Probably they will try to establish the front line in the Seversky Donetsk River, probably, and take Izium again. Probably at the same time, they will try to take Liman or force Ukrainian army to leave these positions.
Yeah, I also think so. So I think this is the last question on the super, or last two questions actually. Do you think what do you think will happen when China send Russian military hardware? I'll start first. I don't think China will send. What do you guys think?
I'm not as knowledgeable about the sort of military hardware that China is sending. Didn't they say something about drones? I don't know exactly which type, but they are thinking of sending drones, maybe more advanced type, not like the Jiran 2s that Russia modified from Iran. Yeah, that could have a qualitative difference if it's sent in large quantities. So we'll just have to see if that happens. But as of now, I don't know.
I don't think it will suppose a big change in the overall strategy. I think that it will have more political consequences rather than military ones. Probably the Western world will try to impose sanctions to China because the aiding to Russia.
And sanctions on China would be much more difficult than on Russia because of the large industrial base within China and the manufacturing. So decoupling from China at such a rapid pace, if that were to happen, it could have implications, especially for the West, but also for China. So I don't know if that will happen.
So this last super chat is a bit weird. So top 5 general on both sides. I actually don't know the generals enough to actually name the generals. So this is a very hard question. But I can say that I'm very impressed with the Ukrainian commander in the Sivers front at the Sivers region. I think he's doing a really good job defending the Sivers region. What do you guys think?
So again, I don't really know many of them either. I don't think really anyone keeps track of it. But for instance, Zaluzhny, he's been a pretty effective. What is he? The Minister of Defense for Ukraine, or is that Reznikov?
He's the chief of defense.
Chief of defense. Yeah. So he's done a pretty good job at keeping the Ukrainian army pretty cohesive. In the earlier days of the war, he was able to keep everything stable. I think the general that was defending Kiev in the beginning of the war, I forgot his name. I was just reading about him. He was able to organize a very well-fortified line of defense on the suburbs of Kiev, and then one on the ring of the city itself. And that his tactics that he employed of hit and run attacks on the Russian columns was a big part of why the initial attempts at taking Kiev and encircling it failed. And that's why we're here now. So he deserves credit.
Yeah. Agree.
Yeah,
so
Zaluzhny play a key role trying to defend all the Russian attacks that are from the east and the west in Kiev during the first day of the war. So probably without this man, Ukrainian army will face many problems in this other area.
So we are just nice 1 hour 29 minutes 40 seconds, and we just nice though, because I planned this to be at most 1.5 hours. So I want to thank you, SuriyakMaps, and THETI mapping. It's an honor to have you guys on. And also, of course, thank you to Weeb Union, History Legends, New World, NWE, War Reports. Military summary didn't appear. He didn't 100% confirm. He told me that he would try to come. So he didn't manage to come because I think it's a bit late for him. I think he sleeps early. So it's 9:30 for him when this show starts. So a bit hard for him. And so thank you SuriyakMaps, thank you THETI mapping for coming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a really an honor. So thank you everyone for watching. Hope you guys enjoy the panel. Sorry I cannot answer any more questions from the chat, but I did cover all the super chats. So thank you so much for it, and I'll see you in the next update. Wait. You guys must follow SuriyakMaps and THETI mapping. THETI mapping's YouTube channel is in the description below. SuriyakMaps Twitter and Telegram channel is also in the description below. Go check out the description, as well as follow Weeb Union, NWE, History Legends as well. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next update.
Bye.